You've spent your whole life becoming someone, building an identity, a reputation, a personality. Others can accept. You've climbed ladders made of expectations, worn masks so long. They feel like skin, and called it growth. But what if everything you've built, everything you call you, is just a carefully arranged illusion? What if the person you defend, the image you protect, isn't your true self, but a prison made of thoughts, roles, and fears? In this video, we're not here to chase success or self-improvement. We're here to tear down the lie that the ego is who you are. Because only when the mask falls can the self rise, and when it does, everything changes. Now listen closely. You live in a house built of mirrors. Every corner reflects back something you were told to be. Your name, your status, your beliefs, your face stitched together into a story you call me. And yet beneath it all, something inside you aches. A quiet tension hums beneath the skin, a sense that you are performing a role whose lines you never agreed to. You smile on cue, succeed on schedule, offer your opinions like coins to the marketplace of identity. But deep inside, you sense the illusion. You feel the emptiness between the words, the stillness beneath the noise. Because the ego, this polished fiction you defend, is not the self. It is the lie you were taught to live. It is the armor you mistake for your soul. And until you see it clearly, you will wander through your own life like a ghost in someone else's dream. The ego is not your enemy, but it is not your truth. It is the mask your psyche created to function in the world. It speaks the language of separation. It believes in comparison, competition, identity. It survives by dividing you from others, from nature, from the numinous presence of your own unconscious. It defines itself by what it is not. I am not her. I am not that. I am not weak. I am not wrong. I am not afraid. And in doing so, it creates the illusion of solidity. It builds walls around you. Labels, roles, expectations. It tells you what to desire, what to avoid, who to become, and it rewards you with certainty, but at the cost of wholeness. Carl Jung knew this. He wrote not to crush the ego, but to outgrow it, to show us that behind the ego's tight grip lies something infinite and unspeakable, the self. The self is not a better version of you. It is not success, not mastery, not enlightenment. It is the center that holds all opposites, the paradox of your being. It contains both your shadow and your light, your masculine and feminine, your death and your rebirth. The ego cannot contain this. It cannot even understand it, because the ego is afraid of death, especially the death of the identity it so carefully protects. But death is the first step toward transformation. Death is not the end. It is the beginning of soul. You cling to the ego because you believe it keeps you safe. But what it really keeps you from is intimacy with yourself, with the world, with the divine. The ego tells you who you are, but the self asks you to dissolve, to fall, to descend into the underworld of your own unconscious and find the lost fragments of your being. This descent is not symbolic, it is real. It comes in the form of crisis, heartbreak, despair. Moments when the ego shatters and nothing makes sense. Moments when all your strategies fail and you are left raw, naked, broken. But it is in these moments that the real alchemy begins, because only when the ego dies can the self be born. The persona, the public mask, shields you. The shadow, your disowned self, haunts you, and between them, the ego plays the king. It tells you to stay consistent, to maintain control, to hold the image together. But life is not an image. It is a current. it changes it. Breathes, it breaks you open. The ego fears this. It wants linearity, not transformation. It wants answers, not mystery. But the soul speaks in dreams, not declarations. It speaks in symbols, in synchronicity, in the quiet, knowing that comes when the surface has been torn away. The ego will resist this. It will cling to its structures. It will panic, rage, deny. But eventually, it will exhaust itself. And in that exhaustion, a new voice will whisper through the cracks. I am not who I thought I was. I am something else, something deeper, something older than my name. To realize the ego is a lie is not to lose your mind. It is to reclaim it. It is to remember that you are not your thoughts, your past, your plans. You are the space beneath them, the awareness in which they appear. You are not the mask, but the mirror. Not the story, but the silence behind it. The self is not something to be built. It is something to be revealed. It has always been with you like a forgotten language written on your bones. And when you stop performing, when you stop defending the image, you can finally hear it. And in that moment, something sacred stirs, a presence, a knowing, a peace that no accomplishment can provide. This is not the path of ambition. It is the path of return. It is the spiral inward, the sacred undoing. It is the crumbling of everything you thought would save you, until only what is real remains. Not polished, not praised, but whole. You will not find yourself in the mirror. You will find yourself in the silence after the mirror has shattered. In the space where the ego finally bows its head and says, I cannot carry this anymore. That is where the journey begins, not toward a better identity, but toward no identity at all. Only presence, only breath, only being. And in that stillness, you will remember what the ego never could. You are already home. The unconscious is speaking. Are you listening? You're being spoken to all the time. Not in the language of logic, not in sentences or facts, but in symbols and dreams, in moods that have no cause, in images that flash behind your eyes before sleep. Something ancient and deep moves beneath your daily mind, a force older than words and more intelligent than reason. It is the unconscious, and it has been whispering to you since the day you were born. But you have been trained not to hear it. You were taught to live on the surface, to believe only in what you can see, touch, control. You were told that to be rational is to be right, that to ignore your instincts is a virtue, that the unknown within you is dangerous. But the unconscious does not care what you believe. It is not interested in your control. It is a river, and it flows, whether you are awake to it or not. The question is not whether the unconscious is speaking, it always is. The question is, are you listening? Carl Jung spent his life walking the edge of that inner world, deciphering the dreams and visions of the human soul. He knew that the unconscious is not a landfill of repressed memories, but a cosmos, a mythic landscape filled with archetypes, with gods and monsters, with forgotten truths and untapped potential. It is the source of your intuition, your creativity, your compulsions, your dreams. And it will not be silenced. You can deny it. You can push it down with routines and distractions, numb it with substances or philosophies. But it will return. It will erupt. It will sabotage what you thought was solid fracture, what you thought was true, and bring you to your knees, if that's what it takes to be seen. Because the unconscious does not punish it, balances when the conscious mind loses its way. The unconscious rises, not to destroy, but to restore wholeness. You've felt it before. That strange pull toward something you can't explain, the sudden dream that shakes you, the emotion that comes from nowhere, the synchronicities, the uncanny moments where reality seems to align with your inner world. as if some invisible hand is trying to catch your attention. These are not accidents. They are messages, symbols, mirrors, and the unconscious speaks in images because the soul does not think in words. It speaks in metaphor, in archetype, in story. And if you do not take the time to listen to translate to feel, it will find another way to make itself heard. Every unresolved wound you carry is held in the unconscious. Every time you silenced your truth to keep the peace, every time you pushed down your rage, your fear, your desire, it did not vanish, it sank down into the psychic sea, and now it swims beneath your thoughts, shaping your choices, bending your relationships, speaking through your body, your anxiety, your restlessness. The unconscious does not forget, it waits. It stores what you're not yet ready to face. But make no mistake, it wants to be made conscious, because what is buried grows powerful in the dark. And what remains unconscious becomes your fate. To begin listening to the unconscious is to enter the mythic. You must learn to see differently, to feel the symbolic layers of your own life, to understand that nothing happens by accident, that the people who trigger you, the patterns that repeat the losses that undo you, they are not just external events. They are mirrors of what is unfinished inside. And when you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what part of me does this reflect? You step into a new kind of power. The power of integration, of healing, of wholeness. Because the unconscious is not just a storehouse of wounds. It is the womb of the self. It holds your unlived life, the parts of you that were never allowed to speak, to feel, to be. And when you listen, they rise not as demons, but as forgotten kings. There is a reason dreams matter, a reason your imagination feels more real than the world at times, because they are doorways. Dreams are the speech of the unconscious, the theater of the soul. And every dream you ignore is a letter unopened. Jung taught us to read these inner letters, to see the characters in our dreams as aspects of ourselves, the shadow, the anima and animus, the wise old man, the trickster, the child. These are not hallucinations. They are ancient patterns. They are the soul trying to show you what the ego will not face. And when you stop analyzing your life only from the outside and begin listening to these deeper voices, your entire inner architecture begins to shift. The unconscious stops haunting you and starts guiding you. But to listen to the unconscious, you must let go of certainty. You must unlearn the need to control. You must surrender to mystery, not as chaos, but as intelligence. You must understand that not everything that is real can be seen, and not everything that is true can be proven. The soul does not care about your resume. It does not care what you have built, achieved, or accumulated. It cares only about what you have integrated, what you have faced, what you have loved and forgiven in yourself. The unconscious is not here to flatter your ego. It is here to initiate you into the wild truth of who you are. The path of individuation, the sacred unfolding of the self, requires this listening. It requires that you stop running from the dream, from the trigger, from the fear. It asks that you turn around, face the symbol, the pattern, the shadow, and ask, what do you want me to see? And then listen in silence, in poetry, in art, in the body, in your discomfort. Listen as if your soul depends on it, because it does. Why you sabotage yourself, and how to stop you want to change. You swear, you do. You make promises to yourself in the dark, draw new boundaries, set new goals, whisper affirmations into the silence, as if they could overwrite the chaos underneath. And yet just when you're about to rise, to choose differently, to become who you say you are, something pulls you back, subtly, quietly. Sometimes with the voice of logic, sometimes with fear dressed up as caution. It makes you scroll longer, eat what you swore you'd stop, Speak when you meant to stay silent, or stay silent when your truth begged to be spoken. This is not weakness. This is not laziness. This is sabotage, and it is not random. It is a pattern rooted in your unconscious. Because deep beneath your conscious desire to grow lives, another force, one more ancient, more instinctual, and far more committed to keeping you safe than keeping you fulfilled. Until you face this part of you, you will never stop repeating the cycle. Because the enemy is not out there. The resistance lives within. Carl Jung knew this truth intimately. He saw the psyche not as a battlefield between good and bad, but as a complex inner landscape of fragments, each with its own will. He taught that we are not one self, but many personas, archetypes, shadows, each vying for control in our moments of crisis and choice. Self-sabotage in this light is not failure. It is a form of protection, a defense crafted in childhood when you learned that standing out meant danger, that being too much led to rejection, that success invited jealousy, punishment, or abandonment. So you adapted. You learned to dim your light before anyone else could. You learned to fail on your own terms before someone more powerful could take it from you. And now these patterns live in your nervous system, in your thoughts, in the tiny choices that shape your destiny. Sabotage is the shadow in disguise. It wears your face, speaks with your voice, but it is not aligned with your truth. It is loyal to your past. It is the part of you that doesn't trust joy, because joy never lasted. The part of you that ruins intimacy, because intimacy was once a prelude to pain. The part that delays purpose, because purpose means visibility, and visibility was once dangerous. This is not a flaw. This is a wound. A sacred adaptation that once kept you alive, now turned against the very life you're trying to create. And it cannot be healed through shame. You cannot bully yourself into becoming. You must descend into the roots, into the origin, into the myth you unconsciously live by. Every act of self-sabotage is a message, not a punishment, but a symptom. The psyche does not forget, and what you refuse to remember consciously, it will repeat unconsciously. Until you stop, until you listen, until you trace the sabotage to its source, and meet the part of you still stuck in the past. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, not its elimination, not its silencing, but its redemption. Because the part of you that ruins things is also the part of you that wants to be seen. Underneath every delay, every collapse, every betrayal of your higher self is a younger self who still believes protection means staying small. You must go to them, not with blame, but with reverence. Because that child in you who shuts down before success, who hides in comfort, who lashes out in fear, they are not the problem. They are the key, the moment you stop demonizing your sabotage and start dialoguing with it. You begin to unearth the gold beneath the wound. You ask, what are you afraid will happen if we grow? What are you trying to protect me from? And if you listen deeply, the answers will come. Not as thoughts, but as sensations, images, memories. The unconscious speaks in symbols. And when you decode its language, your sabotage becomes a teacher. There is a deeper self within you, a self with a capital S, that longs not just to survive, but to become whole. This self is not afraid of success. It is not shaken by rejection. It is rooted in the eternal, in the archetypal, in the wisdom that knows every fall is part of the rising. But the ego cannot reach it alone. It must surrender its scripts, its defenses, its need to be right or certain or liked. And this surrender feels like death because the sabotaging parts of you believe they are you. To release them is to risk becoming someone you do not yet know, but that unknown self, that undomesticated, unfiltered, uncontrollable truth of who you really are, is the one who holds the key to everything you've been seeking. This is the alchemical path, the way of transformation, not through willpower, but through wholeness. You do not heal sabotage by trying harder. You heal it by loving what you once exiled, by becoming the parent, the protector, the witness that part of you never had. You stop running from your fear and instead sit with it, breathe with it, speak to it like a sacred being. And slowly it softens. It no longer needs to block you because it trusts you now. It knows you're not trying to kill it, but to carry it, to bring it home. This is how you stop sabotaging yourself, not by force, but by integration, by bringing all parts of you into the light of awareness and refusing to abandon any of them, even the ones that still doubt your worth. Especially those, because those are the parts that once embraced become your greatest allies. The shadow becomes the strength, the fear becomes the fire, the shame becomes the signal. And suddenly your path is not something you force. It is something you follow because it is unfolding from within. The shadow isn't evil. It's your power in exile. There is a part of you that you've tried to forget, a part that makes you uncomfortable, that doesn't fit your image of who you think you should be. You've called it darkness. You've called it weakness. You've labeled it dangerous, toxic, shameful. But the truth is, it isn't evil. It's your power in exile. It's the voice that was silenced when you first learned that anger made you unlovable, that desire made you selfish, that defiance made you wrong. So you pushed it down. You buried the parts of yourself that didn't earn praise. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You played along while your soul trembled beneath the surface. But the shadow doesn't die. It waits. It lives in your tone, your body, your choices. It slips into your relationships. It sabotages your patterns. Not because it hates you, but because it was never meant to be abandoned. The shadow is not your enemy. It's your neglected ally, your vitality, your instincts, your boundaries, your creative fire. And until you face it, you will live a life half lit, half alive, afraid of your own reflection. Carl Jung understood the shadow not as sin, but as truth, not as evil, but as energy. The shadow contains everything you rejected to become acceptable. And what you reject doesn't disappear. It becomes distorted. It acts out. Not to ruin you, but to remind you. Your shadow is the guardian of the gate to your deeper self. It will block your path as long as you refuse to look it in the eye. The rage you suppress becomes depression. The sexuality you shame becomes projection. The grief you avoid becomes numbness. But when you turn toward the shadow, when you stop running and start listening, it becomes a guide. It becomes the very fuel for your transformation. That is the paradox. The part you fear most holds the key to your freedom. The world has taught you to fear your own wholeness. It prefers you broken into digestible parts. It tells you to be kind, but not fierce. Humble, but not proud, loving, but never too wild. So you split. You learn to be polite, even when you're hurting. To be agreeable, even when your soul says no. You learn to be spiritual without being embodied. But the self, the full living soul, is not fragmented. It is not tame. It is the union of opposites. It is the integration of light and dark, of softness and steel, of grace and fury. The hero's journey is not a climb toward purity. It is a descent into the depths, into the cave, where you meet the parts of yourself you once feared. And there, in the dark, you do not conquer the shadow, you remember it. You gather it, you welcome it home. The archetypes within you are not symbols on a page. They are living forces in your blood, the warrior, the trickster, the lover, the sage. Each one holds wisdom, but without the shadow, they become caricatures. The warrior becomes a tyrant, the lover becomes addicted, the sage becomes cold, the trickster becomes cruel. It is only through shadow integration that archetypes become whole, rooted in truth rather than performance. This is the path of inner alchemy, the transmutation of what is unconscious into consciousness, of what is rejected into what is reclaimed, of what is feared into what is finally embraced. Your dreams have already begun. The work they speak the language of the shadow, showing you in symbols what your waking mind denies. The monster chasing you. It's your own power demanding to be felt. The storm that never ends. It's your repressed rage, the lost child. It's the part of you still waiting to be loved without conditions. Dreams are the soul's cinema, the unconscious, staging its truth in metaphors. You do not need to decode them with logic. You need to feel them, to step inside their world and ask, what is it you're trying to show me that I refuse to see while I'm awake? The personas, the mask you wear to navigate society, will fight this process. It wants safety, predictability, approval. It will tell you that going into the shadow is dangerous, that you will be rejected, that you'll lose control. But that's because the persona was built on control. It is not a villain, it is a function, but it is not the truth. And when you begin to outgrow it, when the self begins to rise, you will feel torn, as if one part of you wants to evolve, while another wants to stay hidden. This is the threshold. This is the death before the rebirth. And it is here in the tension between who you've been and who you're becoming that your soul begins to take shape. Shadow integration is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. It is not about eliminating your flaws, but about understanding their roots. About seeing that what you thought was broken was often just unacknowledged, the anger you fear. It was your voice before it was silenced, the arrogance you despise. It was confidence before it was shamed, the control you cling to. It was your safety before it became your cage. When you bring compassion to these parts, they soften. They stop screaming. They stop sabotaging. Because finally, they are no longer alone in the dark. This is the work of the soul. The dangerous, beautiful, necessary work of becoming whole. Not polished, not pure, but whole. And when you become whole, you stop apologizing for your depth. You stop shrinking to fit into places you've outgrown. You stop seeking approval from those who fear their own shadow. You walk differently. You speak with a voice rooted in the underworld. You move through life as someone who has met themselves in the dark and survived. Not just survived, but awakened. The archetype that owns your life. There's a pattern beneath your pain, a face beneath your habits, a voice that's been speaking through you long before you had a name for it. It shapes your fears, your dreams, your relationships, your failures, your obsessions. It moves beneath your words, behind your choices. You call it personality or fate, or this is just who I am. But it is something far older, far deeper, an invisible template that molds your identity like clay. This is the archetype that owns your life. And until you see it, name it, work with it consciously, you are not free. You are an actor, repeating ancient lines in a story you didn't write. Jung taught that archetypes are not ideas. We think they are systems of readiness, inherited blueprints of behavior, emotion, vision. They are gods living inside your psyche. And one of them is running the show. Maybe it's the hero, always fighting, always striving, never resting. Or the caregiver, always giving, always pleasing, slowly dying inside from unmet needs. Maybe it's the orphan expecting betrayal, seeking love with a guarded heart, pushing people away before they can leave. Or perhaps the ruler obsessed with control, building empires out of fear, afraid of the collapse that silence might bring. These are not just metaphors. They are living energies that have shaped humanity for millennia, and they live inside you not as fantasy but as psychic truth. The archetype that dominates your life isn't chosen, it is inherited, summoned, awakened in childhood, triggered by wounds, reinforced by culture, made unconscious through repetition. But it becomes dangerous only when it is not seen. Because what remains unconscious does not disappear. It governs. And so you become the lover who cannot be alone, the magician who manipulates instead of transforms, the warrior who fights ghosts instead of dragons. You call it destiny, but it is programming. Archetypal possession is subtle. It doesn't scream, it seduces, it feels natural, comfortable, even sacred. You begin to worship the very pattern that keeps you in chains, the savior complex that feeds your need to be needed, the perfectionism that wears the mask of excellence, but hides a deep terror of inadequacy, the martyrdom that earns applause but drains your soul. And you don't question it because it feels like home. But home is not always healing, and not everything that feels familiar is good for you. To free yourself, you must first recognize the pattern, the rhythm that repeats across the seasons of your life. The way you fall in love, the way you destroy it, the way you rise, the way you self-sabotage, the dreams you chase, and the secret part of you that never lets you arrive. These are not random. They are archetypal enactments, ancient scripts playing out through your nervous system, your belief system, your behavioral system. But you were not meant to be ruled. You were meant to become sovereign, not by killing the archetype, but by integrating it, by taking it off autopilot and stepping into authorship. Individuation, the path Jung dedicated his life to, is the slow, sacred process of stepping out of archetypal possession and into conscious embodiment. It is not about escaping the archetype. It is about choosing it, dancing with it, giving it a seat at your table but not your throne. When you name the archetype, it no longer owns you. You begin to see the ways it shapes your desires, your projections, your defense mechanisms. You begin to notice when the wounded child is running the meeting, when the tyrant is speaking through your tone, when the addict is hiding behind your craving for control. And in that awareness, you become something larger than the archetype. You become self. The self is not an archetype. It is the center beyond them. The sacred axis around which all archetypes orbit the self is not an identity. It is a wholeness that does not cling to one mask. It wears all of them when needed and none of them when not. It is the magician without illusion, the lover without need, the warrior without war. It does not possess, it integrates. And when you live from this place, you stop being ruled by unconscious forces. You stop blaming the world for your patterns. You stop performing the script you were handed at birth. You begin finally to live your own myth. But the shift is not immediate. It requires descent. You must go inward. You must confront the archetype that has owned you. Not intellectually, but somatically, emotionally, spiritually. You must speak to it. Let it speak through you. Let it tell you what it has protected you from, what it still believes you need. And then lovingly, you must say thank you. But I am not a child anymore. I am not a puppet. I am not a pattern. I am the one who watches the pattern. I am the one who remembers. This remembering is not a return to who you were. It is a becoming of who you are. Beneath the story, beneath the mask, beneath the possession. It is the moment the hero puts down the sword. The orphan opens the door, the caregiver breathes, the ruler bows, and in that stillness the self steps forward. Not with noise, but with presence. Not with force, but with gravity. And the archetypes, once tyrants, become allies. Power becomes service. Love becomes rooted. Control becomes clarity. And your life finally becomes yours. When the self calls, the mask must fall. You can feel it, can't you? That faint tremor under the skin. That strange, wordless pull in the center of your chest. Something in you is stirring, ancient and wild, like a drumbeat echoing through the bones of your being. It calls to you not in language, but in longing. It speaks through your restlessness, through your dissatisfaction with roles that once felt safe, through the quiet revolt inside. When you smile and say, "I'm fine," but no, you are not. This is not anxiety. This is not a crisis. This is the self calling, the buried eternal self that has waited patiently beneath the mask you were taught to wear. And when the self calls, the mask must fall. You wore it so well, that face you crafted so clean, so composed, so correct. The version of you that pleased the family, the teachers, and the system. The face that spoke with politeness instead of truth. That swallowed pain so it wouldn't inconvenience others, that performed joy when your soul was grieving. This mask was not a lie. It was a survival strategy. It helped you belong. It protected you when your essence was too raw for a world that rewards performance over presence. But masks harden, and what begins as protection becomes a prison. Because over time, you forget you're wearing it. You believe the smile is real. You believe the persona is you. And then one day the self calls and everything starts to crack. Jung named this moment the pull toward wholeness, the beginning of individuation, the inner summons to turn away from the outer applause and descend into the mystery of your own unconscious. This is not the beginning of madness. It is the end of illusion. It is the moment the soul says, "I will not be edited anymore. I will not be polite when I am furious. I will not shrink when I long to expand. I will not speak in borrowed words when my own voice is trembling to be heard." And so begins the shedding. Not all at once, not in grand declarations, but slowly, truth by truth, boundary by boundary, flame by flame. You start saying no, you start walking away, you start hearing yourself again. And the world, confused, says, "You've changed." But you have not changed. You are returning. The unconscious is not your enemy. It is your inheritance. It is the underground river of everything you repressed to be loved. Your grief, your rage, your eroticism, your intuition, your terror, your magic. It pulses beneath the persona, waiting for your courage to look. And when you do not find a demon. You find a mirror that shows you everything you abandoned to be accepted. This is the shadow, not evil, not wrong, but exiled, and it returns not to haunt you, but to heal you. Because you cannot become whole by being only the light. The light is a blade. Without the dark, it blinds instead of reveals. To follow the self is to walk the hero's path, not the path of fame or conquest, but of descent into the labyrinth of your own soul, where the monsters you feared are the parts of you that were never held, where the voice that whispers, "You're not enough," was your childhood, trying to make sense of a love that came with conditions. This path will not give you success in the way the world defines it, but it will give you truth. It will cost you your comfort, but it will return your fire. It will burn your image to ash. But from that ash, something sacred will rise, something no longer performative, no longer conditioned, no longer controlled. You will meet your archetypes along the way. The inner child still longing to be chosen. The inner warrior tired of fighting the wrong battles. The lover aching for real connection beyond fantasy. The magician waiting to alchemize pain into power. These are not imaginary. They are ancient patterns etched into the bones of your being. They rise when you stop pretending. They guide when you stop pleasing. And they awaken when the self takes the throne from the ego. Not to destroy the ego, but to put it in its rightful place, not as king, but as servant. The ego wants structure, control, predictability. It fears chaos, it fears loss, it fears the death of identity. And so it clings to titles, to roles, to definitions, but the self is not afraid of death. The self knows death is how life begins again. And when you answer its call, you do not become someone new. You become someone true. The one you were before the world told you who to be. The one who remembers how to feel without flinching, how to speak without permission, how to walk into the unknown and say, I trust this, I trust me. This path is not easy. You will lose things. Relationships built on your mask will fall away. Spaces that rewarded your compliance will no longer feel like home. You will grieve, you will question, you will doubt. But you will not turn back, because once the self calls, silence becomes unbearable. Once you taste realness, performance is poison. Once you know yourself, forgetting is impossible. This is your becoming. Not through ambition, but through surrender. Not through force, but through feeling. Not by adding, but by subtracting everything that isn't you. You don't need to find yourself. You need to remember yourself. You need to call back the parts of you that went quiet when the world got too loud. You need to hold the pieces you once pushed away. The broken, the brilliant, the brutal, the beautiful. You need to gather them, not to fix them, but to welcome them home. This is not a return to innocence. It is a return to essence, the untamed, unmasked, unapologetic essence of a soul no longer willing to be half alive. When the self calls, the mask must fall. Not because you failed, but because you're finally ready to rise. So let it fall. Let it burn. Let the image you protected die with dignity. And in the stillness that follows, listen. That voice rising from your depths, that is you. That is the self, and it is time. Your true self is hiding in the dark. You keep looking for yourself in the light, in the eyes of others, in the reflection of your achievements, in the comfort of knowing you are seen, validated, applauded. You chase clarity, certainty, answers. You read, you meditate, you strive for calm, hoping the chaos within will vanish in the glow of control. But the truth is not waiting for you in the light. Your truth is hiding in the dark, in the spaces you avoid, in the parts of yourself you silence, in the wounds you dress up in wisdom. Carl Jung said it plainly. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You were not born to be perfect. You were born to be whole. And wholeness means you cannot live only on the surface of your own soul. You must go down into the dirt, into the depths, into the forgotten. The dark is not your enemy. The dark is your mother, the unconscious womb, where your soul first began to form. It holds the parts of you that were not welcome in the daylight. Your rage, your grief, your hunger, your madness, your magic. You did not lose your true self, you buried it. Because the world around you taught you that being whole was too dangerous. That if you showed all of who you are, you would be judged, abandoned, misunderstood, and so you complied. You wore the mask, you became the version of you that earned love. And it worked for a while, until the ache began, until the dreams grew louder, until you felt that quiet desperation behind your accomplishments. until you realized the price of being accepted was the death of being known. The unconscious doesn't stay silent forever. It waits, and then it starts to leak through. In the fight you keep having. In the pattern you swear you'll break, but repeat again. In the heaviness that has no name. These are not flaws, these are signals. The soul speaking in the only language it has left, symptom, symbol, sensation. You don't need to fix yourself, you need to face yourself. Not just the polished surface, but the sacred trembling dark, because your true self, your wildness, your vision, your power, it does not live in the persona. It lives beneath it. It lives in the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is unintegrated. It is all the gold you hid away. Because it scared someone once. It is the part of you that refused to die, even when you tried to suppress it. And when you turn toward it, and when you stop running, and instead say, I see you, it begins to shift. It stops fighting you and starts guiding you. It becomes a lantern in the cave. Jung called this the process of individuation, the unfolding of the self through the integration of the unconscious. Not the destruction of the ego, but its maturation. Not the eradication of the shadow, but its redemption. This is not self-help. This is inner alchemy. And it does not happen through effort. It happens through surrender, through honesty, through descent. Every myth is a map of this journey. The hero is never found in the light. The hero begins in the dark, in the exile, in the ordinary. And then comes the call, the disruption, the refusal, the breakdown. Then the crossing of the threshold into the unknown, into the underworld. There they face the dragon, not to destroy it, but to be transformed by it. The dragon is your shadow, your fear, your unmet grief, your unfaced truth. It guards the treasure you forgot, belong to you. And only those who face it without flinching can reclaim that treasure and return to the world whole. You are not broken. You are breaking open. The life that feels like it's falling apart is the life that no longer fits your truth. The mask is cracking. Not because you've failed, but because the self is emerging. The soul will not let you live forever as a ghost. It will pull you down. It will bring you to your knees, not to punish you, but to initiate you. You are being summoned into the dark, into the mystery, into the forest within you, where the light cannot reach, but where life still grows silent and wild. To walk this path is not to become someone else. It is to unbecome who you are not. It is to shed the layers of performance until only essence remains. You do not need to be more. You need to remember. Remember the fire you swallowed, the voice you muted, the truths you buried under politeness, under roles, under fear. Go back for them. Rescue them. Make a home for what was lost in you. Because until you do, you will keep chasing wholeness in all the places it does not live. This is your work, not to shine brighter, but to see deeper. Not to rise higher, but to root further. The world doesn't need more light workers escaping into love and light. It needs shadow dwellers, soul alchemists, people who know how to sit in darkness without fleeing. People who have learned to breathe in the unknown. To listen when the conscious mind has gone silent. People who have met their shadow and did not turn away. These are the ones who become medicine. Because they are not afraid of the dark, they have learned. It is where the self begins to speak, and the self does not speak in logic. It speaks in symbols, in synchronicities, in dreams, in tears that rise from nowhere, in art that moves through your hands like fire. In the moment you stop pretending and speak a truth so raw it shakes your spine. That is the voice of the self, not loud, but undeniable. It rises when the ego is quiet, when the noise is paused, when you are willing to sit in the stillness of your own soul without needing to fix it. And when you hear it, everything changes. Not quickly, not neatly, but deeply, irrevocably. The journey inward begins with death. You must die before you can live. This is the first law of the inner world, not a death of the body, but of the mask, of the identity you've clung to like a raft in storm water. The journey inward does not begin with clarity or comfort or healing. It begins with dissolution, with the unbearable realization that the life you've built on the surface is too small for the soul that stirs beneath it. You can feel it, something in you is already breaking, not by accident, but by necessity, because who you think you are cannot enter the sacred place. Only what is real can pass through that gate. And so the false must die, the persona must fall, the ego must tremble. You do not become whole through addition. You become whole through surrender. Carl Jung understood this initiation as a descent, a symbolic death that opens the door to individuation. This is the dark night, the collapse. The point where you can no longer pretend, not because you failed, but because your soul refuses to play dead any longer. You may feel lost here, emptied, stripped of meaning. You may feel like everything is slipping through your fingers, and it is, because what is falling away is not your life. It's the image of your life, the one that kept you bound in expectations, in roles, in a constant performance of adequacy. But beneath that performance, something ancient is watching the self, the quiet, luminous center of your being that has waited patiently beneath all your striving. It cannot be awakened by force. It is summoned by truth. And truth often begins in silence, in surrender. In the moment, you finally let yourself fall. Death is not the enemy, it is the threshold. In myth, the hero must die to the known world before they can be reborn into the inner one. In dream work, death is not a warning, but an invitation, a symbol that something must end so something new can emerge. The old way, the old self, the old map, burn it, not in hatred, but in reverence. It brought you this far. It protected you when you didn't know what else to do. But now you are being asked to step across the veil into the unconscious, into the underworld of your own psyche. And it is there, in the place you fear most, that the journey truly begins. You are not who you think you are. The thoughts that race through your mind, the roles you've performed, the name you answer to, all of it is the surface, the persona. A social mask worn to survive. It has value, or yes, but it is not the soul. The persona is thin, brittle. It breaks easily in the face of real emotion, real love, real loss. And when it breaks, the shadow rises, the parts of you you've hidden away, the anger you swallowed, the grief you never gave voice to, the instincts you denied in the name of being good. They do not rise to punish you. They rise to be reclaimed. To descend into the shadow is to meet the exiled self, not the evil self, not the broken self, the forgotten self, the sacred animal within, who remembers what the mind has learned to ignore. It is raw, primal, instinctual, and it speaks not in words, but in energy, in dreams, in tremors, in the feeling that there is something more beneath your skin that wants to be known. Do not turn away from this. This is not regression. This is remembering. You are not meant to transcend the body or the shadow or the dark. You are meant to integrate them, to carry both light and depth, to be holy, not because you are flawless, but because you are whole. And then from within the darkness, symbols begin to emerge. Archetypes, patterns older than you. The mother, the warrior, the sage, the child, the lover, the destroyer. They rise not as fantasies, but as truths etched into your unconscious. They guide you when logic fails. They appear in dreams, in stories, in moments of intuitive knowing. You are not inventing them, you are remembering them. They are the psychic DNA of humanity, and they live within you as blueprints of transformation. When you meet them consciously, they do not possess you, they empower you. They show you what aspect of yourself is ready to rise or to die or to speak. And still, the journey deepens. The anima, the animus, the inner feminine, the inner masculine. These are not genders, they are forces. The anima is the moonlight of your soul. The inner mirror, the oceanic wisdom that knows without needing to prove. The animus is the fire, the arrow, the will that acts, that speaks, that moves through the world. With clarity, most people are possessed by a distorted form of one or both. A wounded masculine that dominates or retreats, a wounded feminine that manipulates or vanishes, but when integrated, they dance. They birth creativity, presents love that does not collapse or control. You are not meant to embody just one. You are meant to marry them within, to hold both sword and chalice in the temple of your own heart, and finally, the self. The still point, the flame at the center of the spiral. It does not shout, it does not rush, it does not seek approval, it waits. And when you are quiet enough, brave enough, empty enough, it speaks. It is not your personality. It is not your story. It is your essence. Your divine pattern, the seed you came into this world carrying before anyone told you who to be. To live from the self is not to become perfect. It is to become real, rooted, awake, alive in every cell, no longer seeking wholeness because you are wholeness. You remember what the persona forgot, that death was never the end, it was always the beginning. Integrate the shadow or be consumed by it. There's a part of you you've spent your whole life trying not to become. A part you silence, suppress, bury beneath politeness, beneath virtue, beneath the image of who you think you should be. You keep it locked in the dark, hidden behind smiles and achievements, as if ignoring it will make it disappear, but it doesn't vanish. It waits, it watches, it grows in silence, until one day it erupts through anger you didn't know you had, through sabotage you couldn't explain, through projection onto others who mirror back what you refuse to face in yourself. This is the shadow, and it is not evil. It is everything you rejected. It is power disowned, fire unloved, truth unspoken. It is your unlived life. And if you do not integrate it, it will consume you. Carl Jung did not speak of the shadow as something malicious to be destroyed, but as something vital to be reclaimed. It is the unconscious counterweight to your conscious identity. Whatever you believe yourself to be, the shadow holds its opposite. If you see yourself as kind, the shadow contains your cruelty. If you see yourself as humble, the shadow holds your arrogance. If you pride yourself on strength, the shadow holds your fear. The more rigidly you cling to your persona, the more violently the shadow pushes back, because the psyche cannot bear division forever. What is not made conscious returns as fate, and what you refuse to own, you are destined to act out unconsciously or attract through others. Your enemies often wear the face of your shadow. The people you despise, mock, or judge most harshly look closer. They are mirrors, symbols, invitations. They carry the qualities you have disowned. This is the law of psychological projection. It is not an accusation. It is an opportunity. Yet every trigger is a teacher. Every conflict a cracked mirror through which the unconscious peers out. The shadow does not show up to punish you. It shows up to complete you, to make you whole. And wholeness is not the same as goodness. It is truth, integrity, inner unity. The capacity to hold light and dark without collapsing into either. Until you can meet your own shadow with compassion, you will keep casting it onto others, mistaking your own wounds for their faults. To integrate the shadow is not to justify harm. It is to own the potential for harm so that you are no longer ruled by it. It is to stop pretending you are incapable of manipulation, of selfishness, of rage, and instead face these forces within yourself consciously so that you can choose differently. The shadow integrated becomes strength. Clarity boundaries. It becomes the spine beneath your compassion, the fire beneath your wisdom. It sharpens your love and deepens your humility because you no longer love from a place of superiority, but from knowing what it means to be broken, conflicted. Real this work is not glamorous. It is not the curated version of healing that earns likes and applause. It is raw, confrontational, humbling. You will face the parts of yourself that disgust you, the jealousy you hide, the pride you mask with humility, the craving for control dressed up as helping, the unconscious games you play to feel powerful, lovable, needed. You will feel resistance, shame, denial. But if you stay, if you keep listening, keep witnessing, keep feeling, you will begin to see that beneath every shadow is a wound, and beneath every wound, a longing, a truth, a part of you that was never met with understanding, and so learned to hide behind defense. Shadow work is not about blaming the past. It is about reclaiming what you lost in it. The child in you who was too loud, too wild, too sensitive, too angry. The one who was punished for being real. The one who learned to fragment in order to be loved. That child did not disappear. They became your shadow. And they have been waiting for you to come back. Not to scold them, not to fix them, but to sit with them in the dark and say, I see you now, you don't have to fight me anymore. You don't have to act out in my relationships or sabotage my growth. I'm here, I'll listen, I'll feel, I'll remember. And in that moment, the war within begins to end. You stop being split. You stop being at war with your own instincts. You begin to trust yourself. Not because you've eliminated your darkness, but because you've made peace with it. You know where it lives. You know how it speaks. You know how to hold it without being held hostage by it. This is inner sovereignty, not perfection, but power. The kind of power that does not need to dominate, because it no longer feels threatened by its own depth. The integrated shadow becomes gold, creative fire, charisma, vision. It becomes the source of art, of leadership, of real intimacy. You stop hiding. You stop apologizing for your depth. You stop needing others to carry what you've learned to hold yourself. You speak more clearly. Love more honestly. Walk more freely, because you are no longer afraid of who you are. Beneath the image, you are no longer afraid of the dark. The path to this place is not linear. It moves in spirals. You will forget. You will fall back into old roles, old masks, old projections. And that too is part of the work, to fall and return. Again and again, with gentleness, with reverence. The shadow is not a project. It is a lifelong dialogue with the unconscious. And every time you choose to turn toward it instead of away, you step deeper into your truth, your wholeness, yourself. The psychological rebirth. No one tells you about. There's a kind of death that no one warns you about. It does not come with sirens or silence. It comes in the middle of your life, disguised as restlessness, fatigue, confusion. It arrives when everything that once made sense begins to feel hollow, when your goals lose their flavor and your reflection grows foreign. It is not a failure. It is not depression. It is the beginning of rebirth. But unlike the stories you were told, this rebirth is not gentle. It does not arrive wrapped in light. It begins in descent, into the unconscious, into the forgotten, into the shadow. You thought transformation would feel like wings. But first, it feels like drowning. You fall inward. Away from the surface, from your plans, from the version of you the world applauded. And what meets you is darkness. Not because you are lost, but because the old light can no longer guide you. The psychological rebirth Jung spoke of does not begin with clarity. It begins with chaos, because the self does not rise until the ego dies. And ego death is not poetic. It is disorienting. It is the unraveling of the mask you didn't even know you were wearing. The sudden realization that the life you've built is too small for the soul that is trying to emerge. This death is sacred. Not because it is beautiful, but because it is necessary. The alchemists knew this, solve et coagula, dissolve, then reform. The gold is not found in ascent, but in the breakdown. And so you descend into your dreams, where symbols speak louder than logic, into your triggers where your shadow screams to be seen, into your compulsions, your grief, your numbness. These are not symptoms to escape. They are thresholds, invitations, as the psyche does not waste pain. It transforms it, but only if you allow the process to complete. Most people abort the process too early. They reach for solutions, for distractions, for premature answers, but rebirth cannot be rushed. It is not a new version of the same self. It is the emergence of something altogether different, not better, but truer. Deeper, aligned not with image, but with essence. And the cost is everything you thought you had to be. This is why so few complete the journey. Because psychological death asks for surrender, and surrender requires trust. In the unseen, in the irrational, in the wilderness of the soul, as you descend, you meet the shadow. Not the villain, but the wounded guardian. The part of you that holds your rejected truths, your denied desires, your abandoned rage. You do not defeat the shadow. You integrate it. You listen to what it has protected. You reclaim the power it has guarded, and in doing so, you begin to remember. Not who you were taught to be, but who you were before the world intervened. The self is not born, it is recovered, excavated from beneath the rubble of roles and expectations. It is not a product of striving. It is the ground beneath the striving. In the rebirth, you begin to see archetypes moving through you. The hero, the orphan, the sage, the destroyer. They are not fantasies. They are patterns in the soul. They guide you when reason fails. They animate your dreams. They shape your myths. And when you meet them consciously, you no longer feel possessed. You feel aligned. The psyche is not random. It is ritual. And this ritual, this death and rebirth, is the central axis of the human journey. No one tells you that awakening will feel like dying. That before you rise, you must fall. That the self does not whisper it, waits, until you are quiet enough, broken enough, empty enough to hear it. This is not punishment. This is preparation. The cocoon must rupture. The skin must shed. The old gods must be mourned. Only then can the real begin. Only then can you say with blood on your hands and truth in your voice, I have died to who I was, and I am not afraid to live as who I am. This is the psychological rebirth no one tells you about. Not because it is rare, but because it is sacred. And sacred things are not sold. They are lived. They are earned. Through fire, through silence, through surrender. And in the end, there is no parade, no applause, just presence, just peace. just you. Not the you created to survive. The you that existed before survival was necessary. That is who is waiting. That is who is calling. And that is who will walk with you when the old world ends and the new one begins, not out there but within.